I hope everyone has a seat. If someone doesn't, just please raise your hand. So good evening. My name is Christophe Cherix, and I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's poetry reading. It's the third event that we organize in conjunction to now, and it's kind of really sad, to the closing of the retrospective of the work of Marcel Broodthaers. It started on Monday last week. We had with us Bruce Jenkins, and we screened some of the artist's 35mm films. On Thursday last week, we had two brilliant artists with us, Dominique Gonzalez-Foster and Rodney Graham, and we talked with Kathleen Shafi about the legacy of Broodthaers' works on the generation who followed him, and it's been an incredible legacy in those last 50 years. Tonight, we are thrilled to welcome Elizabeth Zuba, a remarkable poet and an extraordinary translator. I have to say, Elizabeth has been part of the team in the last year and a half, working on the translation of Broodthaers' poetry, both for the exhibition, but also for the catalog. Elizabeth didn't come alone. She came with 6 fellow poets, and I'd like to welcome them tonight and say how thrilled we are to have them with us. Jen Bervin, Craig Dworkin, Tonya Foster, Christian Hockey, Tan Lin, and Monica de la Torre. So welcome tonight to this event. I'd like to say also how grateful we are toward our Department of Education to support this evening and to have brought us together, and how thankful we have, of course, to Maria Gillison, the artist's widow, who worked so closely with us on the last 3, 4, 5 years to make this project happen, and particularly on the role of the poetry of Broodthaers, both in the first 2 decades of his life, but also how he very much remained a poet throughout his work as a visual artist. And that was one of the goals we had, Manuel Borlia-Villel and myself, when we started thinking about that exhibition, is to show him as someone who started as a poet, but very much remained a poet throughout his practice, not using words all the time anymore, but empty shelves in the walls of his exhibition. As a special request of Maria, and in order to set the tone of tonight's event, I'd like to quote one sentence of James Lee Byers. So James Lee Byers was a great poet, a great artist, a great friend of Marcel Broodthaers. You might remember that MoMA PS1 devoted him a retrospective a couple of years ago, and one of his favorite sentences was the following: like a dream, like a vision, like a bubble, like a shadow, like dew, like lightning. And I can only wish all those things to happen tonight. Elizabeth, please welcome Elizabeth. So my part is not totally over. I have one more mission tonight, is to read one of Broodthaers' poems in French. I'm discovering it as I read it. So, enfin, qu'est-ce que la peinture? Eh bien, c'est la littérature. Qu'est-ce que la littérature alors? Eh bien, c'est la peinture. Eh bien alors c'est bien. Mais qu'est-ce que le reste? Ce qui reste, c'est une réforme de la lune, quand elle est pleine et que les cons y croient, quand elle n'est qu'en mince croissant et soulève des sentiments, quand elle est la nuit noire théorique.
So I'll read our English translation, and when I say our, all of the translations that Christophe mentioned are co-translations that I have been very privileged to experience and work on with Maria Gilasson Broodthaers, Marcel Broodthaers' widow, here with us tonight. And this is one of them, so the translation. Finally, what is painting? Well, it is literature. What is literature then? Well, it is painting. Well then well. But what is left? What is left? A reformation of the moon, when it is full and the fools believe it, when it is nothing but a slender crescent and arouses sentiment, when it is black, theoretical night. In this 1967 poem, and in fact in a number of his writings, Broodthaers equates visual art and literature as a singular, though protean, endeavor. Together they make our only natural satellite, necessarily symbol in all its forms, simultaneously full, crescent, and eclipsed, perceptible, evanescent, and inscrutable. In a late treatise on his art, written in 1974, 10,000 de récompenses, Broodthaers refers to his visual work as a book of poems. Today, he says, the book of poems in new forms has found a certain public, which is not to say that the difference in audiences, poetry and art, does not persist. The second audience ignores what the first attended to. If space is really the fundamental element of artistic construction, language, or material form, then, after this singular experience, I can only oppose it to a philosophy of things written in common sense. It has been much said that the reach of Broodthaers' work has been undermined by a focus on heady theory and complex illusion, by the circuity or not common sense and exophoric rigor of his work. Well, yes, he is a poet. The same concerned enthusiasts point to the accessible play in his work, the irreverent games with symbols, and the punning of words used as if children's toys with exuberance and delight. Again, yes, check, he's a poet. Which isn't to say his poetry isn't also his art. Something that this retrospective has so exquisitely and palpably articulated. The thing is that at its heart, a pun is the simultaneous sustainment of two or more spheres of meaning, a protraction and multiplication of perception, which is also the function of a poem, and indeed every node of a poem, be those nodes words or muscles or eagles. Or to quote Wittgenstein, since we have Broodthaers' Tractatus right here with us this evening among the palms, we find certain things about seeing puzzling because we do not find the whole business of seeing puzzling enough. Tonight, we have 6 poets who do find the whole business of seeing puzzling, or in Broodthaers' terms, makers of new exercises in reading, writers of art as literature. Jen Bervin is an artist and writer whose singular work combines text and textiles with conceptual elements and a minimalist's eye. Bervin is the magical conjurer of dizzying depths in a single stitch or word, and the elusive opacities of perspective as plumbed through the dimensions that range from a silk biosensor poem at the nanoscale to a geocentric river at 1 inch by 1 mile. Craig Dworkin is not only an unparalleled scholar and on conceptual practices in writing and art, but himself sublimely a pioneering poet in the agrammatical, the asemantic, and illegible. In Sartre's words, Dworkin is eminent sculptor in the void, and of the unexpected communication proffered by the materiality of text, page, structure, and form. Tanya Foster is a critical poet whose tensile and dexterous work examines the spatial properties of subjectivity and a continuous refusal and assertion of permanence. Foster pivots the multiplicities of language with dark and unremitting humor toward a powerful narration of identity and place. Poet and translator Christian Hockey is a visionary composer of all things textual, exploring the construction of self through boundless means. Hockey subjects language, the phonemic and logographic, syllabic and alphabetic, to experimental approaches in reading, translation, collage, digital intervention, and the occasional 12-gauge in ever-thrilling capacities. Writer, artist, and filmmaker Tan Lin works in the vertiginous discovery of ambient modes of literature that paradoxically serve to infinitize through transgression and dissolution. In his work, Lin nimbly engages practices of sampling, communal production, and social networks, addressing issues of copyright, plagiarism, and the commodification of attention. Finally, Mónica de la Torre is an inimitable poet and translator working at multiple inceptive junctures of voice and identity. With Borgesian impetus and peerless wit, de la Torre's work theatricalizes language and the constant, non-discrete pluralization thereof. Reading from Broodthaers' work and their own, we begin with Jen Bervin. Thank you.
There is so much to be thankful for. This exhibition, 2 new books, these poets. You've lined up some super favorites, and this crowd, which has many of my favorite people on earth in it. So thank you. I'll open with a very tiny snippet translated by Elizabeth Zuba and Maria Gillison. It's an excerpt from Ponce Bet, which I opened with Carla Nielsen at Columbia. It's the first time I think I've actually witnessed an artist's book arriving at the archive, which for me is a great moment because I make them and I never get to see that. It's from the section, Art of Poetry. The word in codes shines like a solitaire, and well, voila, has impassioned me since I've been able to read. I'm going to read a little from the Silk Poems, and it's, I won't get into it too much, but it's a poem nano-imprinted on liquefied silk film, and it's opening in an exhibition at MoMA in 2 weeks. So the poem, at first glance, looks something like that. And then closer, something like that. And it's a chain of 6 letters, a strand of a poem of 6 letters. It's actually scientifically at a very tiny scale. So in the show, it will be read with a microscope. But today it will be read aloud. The section I'm reading from quotes from a number of poets and scientists, C.D. Wright, artists Agnes Martin, Diana Frid, Cecilia Vicuña, Marta Werner, Fiorenzo Amanetto, Rosemary Waldrop, and Franck André Jam. I should say that the poem is written from the perspective of the silkworm, and it's written to the person with the biosensor implanted inside of them. So this is a liquefied silk film in the form of a biosensor with a poem on it, if that's not utterly clear. And I'll read just one section from it. Truly miraculous thing, waking up. We slip our skin. It's a function of poetry to locate those zones inside us that would be free and declare them so. Are you surprised I quote a poet? Don't be. We invented language. Look, in divinations as early as the Shang dynasty in 1050 BC, there are oracle script characters written on tortoise shells for silk and silkworms, silk fabrics and mulberry trees. Silk, to say it in Chinese, with the wrong tone, is a death by stabbing, is the number 4, is literally this. The radical in the character for silk precedes hundreds of words, words for paper, textile, for part of a book, words for home, family, household, words like warp, weft, latitude, longitude, parallel, boundary, root. Words like compile, compose, edit, arrange, weave, write, make up, fabricate, invent, paint, organize, group, plate, tress, pass through, endure. To spin, shift, bear, stand, manage, maintain. The radical in the character for silk precedes imminent, ordinate, abiding, a net, a line, a wire, a thread, a string, a filament, the smallest, slightest, hardly a bit, a deformation shaped like a line, the color red. Have you ever wondered why the oldest Chinese oracle script has a writing style called bird and worm script? Have you ever wondered why Book 1 of the Confucian Analects is called Digested Conversations? Really? From the philosopher born in a cave called the Hollow Mulberry Tree? I'll recite my favorite passage for you. When I have presented one corner of a subject to anyone, and he cannot learn from it the other three, I do not repeat my lesson. Okay, that's it, that's the first little section. So that was a silkworm speaking of the mulberry leaf, if that wasn't utterly clear. Inside me, spiracles, concentric branches, a weft, too beautiful to see. Nabokov writes, you read with your spine. I read with my breathing. A transparent chain of tubes. 9 pairs they flower on each side of my body. With each contraction, they circulate delicious oxygen. In movement, freshness. I am fully fledged, fat as a finger, slate pale blue, oyster white, 10,000 times heavier, 30 times longer, about 30 days old, but who's counting? Me. Silkworms love to count. I will show you myself a safe place to transform. At least I mean to, but start wandering. Restless, fidgety, I regret my bravado and shrink a little, pinkish. My chest becomes transparent. I throw my head back and feel like I'm going to throw up. Silk comes sputtering out just below my mouth. My spinneret works 9 or 10 inches of it in the first minute. 65 elliptical motions, my head is spinning. The brin issues in a glutinous state, hardens into lines, becomes structure. First I panic, then relax into it. I enter the flow. With strength, length, and luster, the fibroin strands emerge prismatic, 2 triangular tubes glued in Saracen. When light shines through a prism, it breaks into 7 colors. With elasticity, affinity, and the right mindset, always are easy. I write it side to side in infinity loops, figure 8 spins, 15,000 times, 300,000 times, 400,000 times, as much as 6 miles, 60 hours, 3 days. Sure, I count. Slow it down. Concentrate on the line. Elongate the loop. Modulate it. I try not to have ideas because they're inaccurate. Instead, I try to think of the words I want to spend time with. I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Christoph. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm really honored to be in this company. I'm going to read the first poem in Broodthaers' Zodiac sequence from his book La Bête Noire. And all the translations I want to read today are thanks to Elizabeth in celebration of her fantastic work and the beautiful new Siglio book. So Zodiac. Lost in solitude, I've always been prey, like the long-eared hare. I am apprehensive. My shadow is immense. Sadness, a scent of wild ducks. Melancholy, bitter, castle of eagles. And so Broodthaers here is recycling a line that he first used in his ogre book, where the fourth poem, with a pun on flight and rape, on envol and viol, nicely captured here as ascent and assault, reads, "Oh, sadness, ascent of wild ducks, assault of birds at the forest granary. Oh, melancholy, bitter castle of eagles." That talismanic final line, which will come to countersign the entire department of eagles in his fictive Museum of Modern Art, obviously structured like that move from envol to viol, along the lines of the move from aigre, bitter, to aigle, eagle. And you get, I think, an even closer sort of lexical alignment underwriting the opening poem from his 1960 volume Manui, the Midnight. Dans la forêt de la musique, il y a un petit violon, la racine des arbres. En silence s'achève. Au bout d'un fil d'air, que battent les tambours de rat. In the forest of music, there's a small violin, the root of trees. A silence comes to a close at the end of a thread of air. What beating of the king's drums. And though I think you get the echo of envol and viol in that little violon, here the poem on reflection seems to be structured around the words timbre and timbre, timmer and timber in Dutch. The wood of the trees as the root, the origin of the particular sonority of the violin in the forest of music, and that timbre of timbres, both echoed there in the field drum of the royal percussion, les tambours du rat. And indeed in French, the very first definition in the lettré of timbre is a catgut string, like the string on those little violins that is doubled on the bottom of a snare drum in order to make it more resonant. So it is precisely, as Broodthaers says, silence ends at the end of a chord of air. Exact, the deterritorialized string of the violin and its aria, its melodic air repurposed in the service of a percussive battery. And this linguistic organization of artworks through the asymptotic approach of two words as if they were etymologically related, the sort of pataphysical linguistic extrapolation from the logic of the signifier reaches its apogee in that infamous difference between la moule, the shellfish mussel, and le moule, the sculptural form or mold, so both the iconography and the putative, the questioned genre of Broodthaers' practice coming together in that single homophone. But those muscles, furthermore, I think might be read not just as an index of national cuisine, but as a visualization of the punning logic of surrealist eroticism, which in fact linked muscles to the visual itself. André Breton described Euve Tanguy as, quote, the first to have penetrated visually into the kingdom of mothers, that is to say, the wombs of muscles. And making explicit this pun that they loved on mère and mer, on mother and ocean. There's a couplet by Robert Deneau that reads, the sea muscles of the mother's molds derive their form from the eye. Les moules des mers aux moules des mers empruntent leur forme d'huile. And in the unsigned Chronique de la vie sexuelle, which was published in the second issue of the renegade surrealist journal Le Grand Jeu, 1929, those muscles are the specific fetish that defines a kind of vicarious, sadistic eroticism. And the essay's fourth case history, this anonymously redacted subject prurently asking a woman, have you ever seen a mussel being cooked? And when she describes its elle bave, it's drooling and it's writhing as it suffers in the boiling water, the interrogator becomes increasingly aroused and approaches this sort of numerical climax of proxy scopophilic narrative. Mais avez-vous déjà vu cuire 2 moules? Avez-vous déjà vu cuire 10 moules? All the way up to 100 moules. And then by the time he gets to 1000 moules, he has his curiosity, quote, satisfied. So picking up on this affinity to kind of outlier surrealism, I think there's a lot to be said about Broodthaers' relation to the distinctly politicized brand of surrealism that was incubated in Belgium that leads to the Situationists, among others, but then also following Broodthaers' signature mode of punning. I'm going to read just the last section of a poem of mine that takes the proximity of the name Louis Aragon and the element argon as if they were in fact related, because I can't shake the sense that they in fact are. All right, this is Arcadia. The incandescents that replaced the gas lamps in the Passage de l'Opéra display their threads in miniature shop windows. The filaments bear delicate domed anthers. The papers yellow with the pollen and fluoresce. The soap leaves being then poured out of the tube and separated from the quicksilver seemed to be perfectly neutralized, and they did not at all discolor paper tinged with the juice of blue flowers. Wrought ironic scroll work wrote. A slow Charybdis circles spiraling the shell lake. Cowries scratch of sand that lines the shallows of the sound. Currency accumulated to an image charges. And so now, once invisible allergens fluoresce, excited and tremulous with the current, exited and sent out in the flow the predicates silt. They speculate upon the deposits left by an action, relic, devet, compass, fuss. The particles wink in the late long night at the Capitol. The dust breeds on the vinyl and the plush. Gins that spin to stoke the lapping of their liquid song, these cylinders are cades to breed up in softness, a collection of motes along a rift, a gap of styled surf that tricks trawling needles into drifts of buffet and becalm as static off the surfeit hiss and skip of oily, racked shellac punctuates the passage in a syncopated cycle of profane illumination from the tubes of vacuums cracking, now off, now on. The stroller finds a pantomime of shallow ridge and shadow, which first appear and then from a measured volume to indefinite expansion. One March morning, 1969, on a sandy beach in Santa Monica, 1 liter of argon was returned to the atmosphere. Thank you.
my phone up because I was thinking, God, it would be great to take a photo of the audience. But I am not particularly adept at the panoramic shot. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for this opportunity. One, to engage with Broodthaers, to learn about his work, and to think about other possibilities for ekphrasis, what it can mean, how it happens. And I thought I would start with a kind of call and response. First reading a poem by Broodthaers, and these two are not Elizabeth's translations, but I'll end with Elizabeth's translations. One is an untitled poem, and it's translated by Paul Schmidt. And it goes, "They said to us, 'Thou shalt not kill,' and they deserve to die themselves. 'Thou shalt love thy neighbor.' They drew rafters inside the A's and on top of the T's. They made images. They told us we were children. They kept us from reading the text. Since there is not a line which does not condemn them. Belles lettres, plugs the eyes. They filled my language with jazz and jazz, a cotton stuffing. Silence, silence. Children and fishes, they will throw us into the sea. They will throw us into prison. They have lost their faces." And my sort of response comes from a book of mine called A Swarm of Bees in High Court, which is a kind of ekphrasis, a response to, a sideways response, I should say, to a Max Ernst painting that is instead, it's not that Max Ernst morphs into Wangeshi Mutu, but something happens. It becomes something else for me. And it's a long poem with these kind of punctuated titles that are just breaths between. But if I was a bird, I'd shit on you. Keisha, Chris, and Giselle, too. If I was a bird instead of an axle tree, we might could fly. And I think I chose that as a response because I was very interested in his use of the pronoun. Who's the they, who's the us? What is that kind of shift in perspective? And that little poem for me is about certainly the I, as we imagine it. The second poem of Broodthaers is Azure, translated by John Shepley. We've come to the end of a wet July. What I need is to discover a mystery. I remember the blues I've seen in the old masters, on more than one mantle of the Virgin, and the distant blue that serves as an alterable sky for conventional scenes of the Passion. Those theatrical blues that I wanted to plumb and of which the true memory, that of matter, perfectly handled, has stayed in my mind. Azure, formless constriction site, Golgotha and Tower of Babel, matter. The first stage of most of my journeys has been the ancient daydream, an approximation as close to and far from the brilliant idea at its point of departure as during its flight to its point of arrival. Sleep or rapture, the idea's repose. Image in pursuit of image. Solitude provoked by a more profound denial. And the response. Her mother. I'd hate you to miss sex when she wanted to be a nun. Her mother, I'd like to hear this, what do you know about a man? When she wrote home about her lover whose mother taught her to knit. When she wrote home about knitting, she was still girl incognizant, still the girl writing, we are the faces we wear in flashback. Still the girl with a face like a movie screen, who knits skull caps with yarn, red as cartoon blood, red as Mammy Two Shoes shoes, matchstick heads, yarn red as cartoon lips and tongues, red as bandanas and pomegranates, red as blood, butterflied across the seat and white of summer culottes. Red as blood that says woman, maybe mother, says watch and count. Red as velvety cake she thawed and ate over 2 months' morning times. Red as velveteen curtains she wanted to drape around this moment. Red as morning, as bluster, as bluff, as the flat of offering plates. Red as morning, as unheeded signal to stop, as sliced rare meat. Red as cherry now and laters, as pickled pig's lips, as bruised knuckles. Red as cherry blow pops, as big red gum, as loitering before sleep. Red as distant red hook bees, drunk on cherry fungicide cocktails. Red as distant space, mapped bought and belonging to brutish say-so. Red as the administration of districts and blocked off blocks. Red as the administration of want, as the red-handed wave, so long. Red as red squirrels, as maples, as districts set for and lit with wanting. Red as red squirrels, North American, Eurasian, native, migrant. Red as red as red, ass red as a baboon's ass is red. Come on, stop. As red as the seeping of coulda, woulda, you know. Red as subjunctive being the butt of taken and took down. Red as subjecting beings becoming to merchandising lines and limits. A red letter day in the red light district of insomniac night. A red letter day for seeing red scare out of reason. Red cold from rubia or madder root lends the hermit majesty, the woman infamy. Red cold from sawdust of the Brazil wood tree, primped a pope's robes. Red cold from clay, from crushed conch-nail, kermes, from worms dried and ground. Red cold from cinnabar, mined by the enslaved, the imprisoned, not eyes. Red as compass, gauge, as stripe, as strike, as undertone of home. Red as compass, gauge of light cycling the edges of 620 to 740 nanometers. Red as was here, as becoming not here. Red as note and gone and not. To turn to this wonderful collection. I chose 3 poems from this collection, and it's Elizabeth's translations. The first is from Ogre, and it's Spiced History. The brigands advanced under the cover of the trees' overcoats. The grammarians listened to the crackling of muskets at the edges of their wooden workbench. Air performed with power horns. Night came with its hail of cartouche. The moon turned its pistol on the passive thieves. A hedge of policemen hoarded the prison pathway that opened before them like the castle of their dreams. It's too hot. Brother, are you here? Pass the cold of the chains over your forehead. Tomorrow it will be the coolness of the gallows. Let us sleep so that we may be able to muster some renewed courage. Yet honest men pursued these nightmarish hands into the vice of the night. And the reality. Who are you? Your laugh, your voyaging to the star. Beauty for creating fear in the universe of numbers. She, the freedom. Hurrah, hurrah, hurrah. Clouds of hair bound together by mast post. An anchor to the light. Now end with the grass. The centuries are lined up in a box of matches. I'll buy. I have an 8p. The sun is blue at the star's window. Midnight dances with the fairy as a tendril. A little green at the ear, I dream of the alphabet. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christian Hockey, and thank you, Elizabeth. And thanks also to Jess Van Nostrand for putting all this together. This is a poem from the Siglio book, translated by Elizabeth and Maria. It's called Final Poem. I swim to the town where I'm born. From turret to turret, I swim to the Chateau de Monet. I march into the dawn of streets. From dawn to dawn, I dream of my blind fortune. Fallen deep into my pocket of anguish, I collect a little bag of bile. I could paint life in green. How many mirror staircases must I still climb or descend to see out of the tower window, dig the well where my mother floated in her belladonna nightgown? The streets enter from all sides. Blue flies begin to circle. They cast their eyes down to the pavement. They cry out that it is morning, that it is war, that life is costly, that it doesn't fail to run too fast, that a storm has come quick, that it isn't surprising, and that one has said it well. After the storm, I saw blue like the blind. That which had been lightning became the zigzag of my steps. So I chose a new poem, partly because it's a new poem and I wanted to be present with new work, but also it's a poem that was written in response to a photographer's work, Andrea Parlato. The title is The Downstream Face of an Obstruction. A cloud of steam crossed railroad tracks, telephone wires, electrical poles. A clump of hair, a crust forms, a crust, a few lemons lit, a field at night, grass, a field, a wheat field, a body in the middle of it, face down. A figure is chiral if it is not identical to its mirror image. A flowing crust, a glass spills, a hair on the negative in the camera, the lens, a laptop's keyboard, a black hair in the crevice of the shift key, a mantle. A mother is a mirror you fly into over and over, a window, a placed mirror, replacement. A ring is an argument against horizons, lights. A single figure standing in nature is not nature, a stance, a strategy to avoid predators, a strategy for predators. A sudden disturbance in a pattern when you least expect it, beauty, a theory in the flesh, a way of seeing articulated alongside what is seen, an argument against techno-capitalist infrastructures, an arm around a shoulder, an image of another image approaches thought, a glass filled by the hand that knocks it into feeling, and another thing, felt difference is a close-up, antennas, foliage, birefringence, black puddles, bubblegum, ballooning, but the cloud of steam was left behind by a train, but the layers frozen, layer, cell phone towers disguised as flagpoles, street lamps, pine trees, chimneys, crypsis, the ability of an animal to avoid detection by other animals, crystals terrify, decolonization, I placed a jar in Tanasi, decomposition, dent de lion, a lion's tooth, dissolution, either a pair of chemical compounds whose molecular structures have a non-superimposable mirror image relationship to each other, and worlded and belonging to it. We owe it something. Enantiomorphism, every seed asexual, clonal reproduction, inhale, X, everything floating on something else, into, against, excessive symmetry, face down in a field, a body, fenestrated, syndactyly, fused, grass, gum, hit enter, return, hold your own hands for a minute. How to survive a world structured by those who structure the world with ease. I can't bear to wake in this light. I want to leave these jeans, these boots, this body, this underwear. If there's distance between one thing and another, it's only because the weeds have yet to fill it. Inhale, make a wish. I've plucked myself for you. The last seed clings, the lungs, enter objectivity. It doesn't flow. It only exists if it's continuously spoken. Keep blowing as long as you can until it explodes. Lie down, chest first on the earth, and exhale all the way down to the dirt. Mimicry is safety from patriarchy. Minnows, their small mouths, mirror neurons, mirror trees, mirrors, image, misaligned, monitor your pain. Mountains, deserts, my brother survived Rikers Island by pretending to be insane. Neurons coding a movement reduce their responses with time of exposure to a constantly moving stimulus. No other world but this one, of a pair, either or, often larvae attach small twigs, fecal pellets, or pieces of vegetation to the outside of their cocoon in an attempt to disguise it from predators. On schizophrenia and mirrors, too much of the original wave signal is preserved. On the downstream face of an obstruction, one butterfly, our hair protects us, keeps us warm, pattern, pistol, phosphor at the edge of the night sky, which touches the pillows are formed when a large flow of water runs into a large obstruction. Pistol, positional identity versus redemptive narcissism. Rocks secrete, accrete. Sintering is effective when the process reduces the porosity and enhances properties such as strength, electrical conductivity, translucency, and thermal conductivity. Solidarity, spread your wings to be invisible. Stationary eyes, a stationary stimulus. Stitching, suicide, definite articles, as if the world imagined were surge protection device. Yes, tap-rooted, perennial, herbaceous. Telecom leases can be excellent sources of ancillary income that rush toward the edge, the plummet, the other side, risk. The apomacs are among us. The assembly line runs through the facultative groins overgrown with moss. Who wants some? The body vomits to kick itself back into itself, to decolonize the boundary between life and death, an image policed. The cat displaces itself a certain distance each time you look off frame. The cheeks expand with the bubbling gum, the edge slowly eroded by continuous water flow, the minnows nimbling fingertips, toes, the sheet eddies around obstruction of the hair, the tools made to keep the body's detritus out of the tools. This is all that's left, to be held by a whole filled with the materials that created it, tough or soft, opaque or transparent, solid or mesh-like, of various colors or composed of multiple layers, tough to hide in your own home. 2 leaves my body, 2 water spilled finds a path out of the photograph. We are at peace knowing we have no need to even register the feeling of how little we care about being desired. We see the horizon only when we tilt our head to the side. We sleep alongside our hair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's really nice to be here. I wanted to thank Elizabeth and Maria for their translation. And I've read this book, I don't know, 7 or 8 times now, and I'm not quite sure why I like the poem so much. I mean, I've been thinking about this, but I think maybe it has to do with palm trees and the vegetative state. So I'm going to try to read some vegetative things tonight. This is a poem by Broodthaers. It's called Paternal Love. They fall asleep. I plant 7 cherry trees in the loose soil as their souvenirs. In a dream, they will traverse entire forests. Their satin nightgowns will be ravishing. They fall asleep by the enormous drifts of stones carried in by the undercurrent of the riverbed. The universe is the house of their blood. Behind the wolf's teeth, Bun, the little fairy, grinds her coffee. The wind allies itself with the fire. The rafts burn in the night. 7 small girls with reddened breasts descend the walls of their father's stomach. The toads devour themselves at the heart of diamonds. This is called Beacon of the Small Butter Pot. And after I read this, I thought, oh, we must have a butter pot in our house, but I was not able to find it. So, a storm carries off the bride. Along the hem of stones, I have a bite to eat in the company of the lighthouse watchman. It is unusual, he says to me, to be in a dungeon's mist as we are and believe oneself at sea. White fire citadel, tower of the bloodthirsty, fixed fire varied in red shards, 3 every 3 minutes. The bride appears to me by eclipse 10 miles in the distance. She descends the sand staircase. I believe she comes to bring me tender blue milk. I fall asleep. She arrives, disciple of the fires of the tower and citadel. The light dances at the tip of the new jetty. It is a worn-away sun, the watchman says. You could glimpse the blue beard of the sea. A storm carries off the light. And this is called a drama of solitude. My master will be back soon. A sunbeam drove a patch of fresh snow under the logs of the door. The dog awaited the huntsman of ogre season. Not a single skin to load on the sleigh. The dog said, "How happy I am to see you again and to share with you these cans of bean stew." "Filthy beast," he said, "you bring me bad luck." He dragged him out to the front of the hut and killed him in one shot. The huntsman of ogres looks out over the shifting horizon and murmurs, "Moreover, I prefer to be alone in the great north." Okay, I'm going to read something a little vegetal now. So this is called 1935, The Present Situation in Quantum Mechanics. All readings shall be fully warranted or deregulated by fair use laws. A friend of mine, Tom Newland, is an amateur farmer and professor of Russian. In 2001, he wrote a book on the Russian graphomaniac Andrei Timofeyevich Bolotov, who is best known for writing 3 books in a single 24-hour sitting, for writing the equivalent of 350 volumes of mostly unpublished work during his lifetime, and for writing an individual poem to every plant in his garden, and when he ran out of plants, every non-plant in his house. Over the course of his life, he wrote To Thee, O Green Settee, a sonnet to Bolotov's favorite sod sofa, he had 3, and verses to the stand from my pocket watch. My friend Tom is actually the opposite of Bolotov. For Tom, getting 2 or 3 words down can take a week, and so Tom is actually a reader of an altogether more diffident and cumbersome sort. He is the opposite of a graphomaniac, i.e., he is a very, very slow serial reader. One might say his reading practices are highly residual, as if everything he was reading were a code or compressed object. To understand something, he has to read it 2 or 3 times over the course of many months. Sometimes a reading, which is really the rehearsal for a reading, can transpire over years. Tom says this practice he picked up in childhood, where he lived in a part of Philadelphia called Seacane, and grew up on what was basically a farm enclosed by suburbs. 16 acres of dilapidated farm and unused pasture, with a number of animals, mainly cats, that were old and blind and incontinent. Because books were scarce, and the cats would run in and out of the rooms with birds in their mouths, Tom would read books over and over again. It is a very beautiful experience when you read and read and read and read a book so slowly and methodically and recursively that all you do is keep waiting for something to repeat, like a plant or an animal that comes into the room you are reading in. But of course, a book never does come in like that, in the same way that your childhood never repeats childhood until you become an adult. As any child can tell you, you should never have to put down a book to read it. Everyone loves to see a plant become another plant, or an animal become another animal. Nothing is slower or lovelier than a book that knows how to reproduce. This is called 5180. The best way to read a book like a building is to read it over and over again. The mechanical is a system of gradual connections between dependent terms. D and G said that. Reading should be no different. Nothing is not substitutable with something else. All templates exist simultaneously, thus making the history of a book a static diagram with its own uniform past and predicted future. Roland Barthes was wrong. Like a grocery list or an anecdote, the interior of a book can be read innumerable times without damaging the contents. Things that are obvious are the most obtuse. Things that are lacking in details are the most languorous. The more generic a book is, the more consumable and lugubrious are its diagrams. 57, 29, 22, 2, 23, 51, 6, 2, 51, 7, 04. Like an index of meaningful moments, desire is about waiting for nothing. Cookbooks are the most empty diagrams of our lives. Reading a cookbook is an exercise in extreme loneliness. I remember when I first moved to New York to work for Viking Penguin as a poetry slush reader in 1979. I was 22 and had just graduated from college. I first lived in Riverdale on the couch of a college friend's sister, who was an editor at Newsweek, and her husband, who was a college physics professor and was about to run for the state senate in Pennsylvania. Because all of us were always at work, I hardly saw them during my stay, though I think we once all went on a picnic in Central Park to hear Pavarotti. They never said a word about how my apartment search was going. Because I was young, I really did not know how long not to stay, and so it took 2 months for me to excuse myself to a series of cheap hotels. First the George Washington on 23rd Street, and later the Pickwick Arms Hotel on 51st Street, where I settled in for 6 months. My room did not have a kitchen, but it did have a sink, for which I was grateful. The sink enabled me to keep my milk and yogurt iced for the night and to eat breakfast in the morning on my way out the door. Because there was no kitchen in my room, I usually ate dinner at Blimpie's or a Greek coffee shop on the corner of 2nd Avenue and 51st Street, and then came back to a hotel whose lobby and carpeted corridors were populated by bag ladies. Everything that I think about New York, the ease and difficulty and anonymity of its foods and its forms of shelter, led me to think how the city's intellectual and literary life, which I dreamed of, must also be anonymous and non-specialized, a blank form for all those things that I did not yet know. And in that way, everything that I wanted for myself was already formed and routinized in that short 7-month period, and would become something entirely different after that year. How many times can one change and still remain exactly who one was? I have never gone back to see whether the cheap hotel or the Greek coffee shop still stands on 51st Street and 2nd Avenue. What does it mean to no longer desire something like a Greek coffee shop? People fall in love with anecdotes all the time. Life is non-specialized, or it ceases to exist. Thank you.
Thank you so much again. I want to thank all of you for coming, and the museum, Christoph Scherix, and Elizabeth Suba, and congratulate her on that incredible book that Siglia put out, and also the education department, and Pablo Elguera, and everyone who made this happen. Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here. I'm going to take a different angle and read not from the poetry, but from a volume of collected writings that was put out in Spain a few years ago. It's Ediciones Polígrafa, and it's a really great volume. The person who compiled all the material is Maria Gleason, of course, in collaboration with Gloria Moore, and it's really I couldn't keep my hands off of the material in that book, and hence, pardon? It's more Gloria than you, okay, but you gave her your blessing, with your blessing. It's a okay. So I couldn't resist also to read a text about the Imaginary Museum at a museum, and I will read you some letters. And I'm also just fascinated by the actualizing power of these letters, often open letters. This one is an open letter. And here it is. Office of the Ministers of Culture. Ostend, September 7th, 1968. Opening. It is our pleasure to inform the clientele and the curious of the inauguration of the Département des Aigles of the Museum of Modern Art. The works are in progress. Their completion will determine the date on which we hope to show in all their splendor, hand in hand, poetry and the visual arts. We trust that our slogan, disinterest plus admiration, will entice you. On behalf of one of the ministers, Marcel Broodthaers. And his address, see you soon, dear friends, and then the following: object, metal, spirit, 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 and on for another 5 lines. A Black Silence, 1969. This was unpublished. A black silence, a black pyramid, a black cube, things called fish, museums, academies, A triangle, a triangle, a triangle, a blurry surface, water, air, fire, earth, or earth, a sociable character, a crowd, a volume, a library, fishes, museums, extraordinary nights of love, strange fish, new injustices, surfaces, squares, triangles, circles, rectangles of a depraved sky. Organic, yellow sphere, orgasm, studied sphere, black sphere, liquid, public collection, white. Dusseldorf, 19 September 1968. Museum. A rectangular director, a round servant, a triangular cashier, a square caretaker. Play on reality in its representation using an industrial technique. What reality? Through applying this scholarly theory to the superficial world of the city and its newspapers, I believe I discover a nature all my own. I feel solidarity with all approaches having objective communication as their goal, which implies revolutionary criticism of the dishonest use of the extraordinary means we have: press, radio, black and white, and color television. To my friends, people with no admittance, we will be playing here every day until the end of the world. M. Broodthaers. Another open letter. Brussels, August 25th, 1969. Dear Sir, Le Musée d'Art Moderne, section ... etc. ... is composed of these elements. 1. Packing crates bearing labels for shipping works of art. Fragile, top, bottom, picture. 2. Postcards reproducing paintings of the 19th century. Ingres, Delacroix, David. You will get some idea of it from the photo attached, but I am not really satisfied with this photo, as I am not sure how valuable a document it is as a true testimony to this museum, which, more than just a decor, represents for me a situation, a system defined by objects, inscriptions, various activities such as the act of writing to you now. If this museum is a specific reflection, which expresses itself through a space opening onto the street and enclosed by a garden, on art, what is the significance of this letter beyond the simple communication that links us? And what is the role of this character, the old continental machine? I propose, as participation in the exhibition Concept Art XX, the exact reproduction of this letter in the catalog which I wish to be displayed showing that page, that is, with the catalog open on a table or on the wall. Will we then find answers to these questions, or yet another strange relationship between these terms of art and concept? Let us imagine, in the meantime, dear sir, dear friends, the actual text and the reality of the text as one world, and its roads, its seas, its clouds, as if they were those of a freedom and a justice. Département des Aigles. Brussels, Antwerp, September 27, 1969. Dear friends, a historical date, no doubt, but there are others. History? Yes. No. I think so. Dear friends, one thing to say to you: save the furniture. Marcel Broodthaers. Blow the whistle on all ideology, 1971. 1. Blow the whistle on all ideology that can develop around a symbol. It's false. 2. Study these symbols, eagles, objectively, and particularly their use in artistic representations. Eagles are useful. 3. Use the discoveries of conceptual art to shed light on objects and paintings of ancient times. Conclusion: the eagle is a bird. Département des Aigles. History. Museum in the present tense. I am the eagle. You are the eagle. He is the eagle. We are the eagle. You are the eagle. They are cruel and cowardly intelligent and impulsive like lions, like foxes, like rats. And apropos of these beautiful palm trees, he did send this letter to a museum director in, where was the museum? In Cologne, when a work by Hans Haacke was censored from an exhibition that they were both participating in. So he sent this letter to the director. Dear Sir, concerning the exhibition, Village Remains Village. After 20 days of sleepless nights and careful thought, I kindly ask you, with the aim of maintaining my harmonious relations with the Wallraf Richards Museum, to add another palm to those I have set out in the exhibition. I hope thereby to add to my renown and be well considered among those circles which deal with the transformation, the transportation, and the speculation that ensure the glory of exotic trees. Yours faithfully, Marcel Broodthaers. And to end, I will just read a couple of poems of mine that go back to that early question in Elizabeth's beautiful introduction. What is painting? Well, it is literature. What is literature then? Well, it is painting. And these are fictive artworks of mine that recycle some language of Broodthaers along with many other authors. Figure 22, untitled, 1985. View from above. My memory is a black and white film. It's severe and different from this reserved stock of images, as if undulating, awful curtains should part. The eye's black frame renders the glance penetrating, and the range that sets fire to the cheekbone goes to increase the brightness of the pupil. Makeup doesn't need to hide, there having been more of the same color than could have been expected when all four were bought. Bananas? I always eat them. I'm entitled to a dozen cocktails. Please, keep smiling. Act. Go on. Industry uninvestigated. Systematized confusion. My memory is a color film, technically superior to commercial films. I prefer black and white film. It's more severe and suits my taste for analysis. It's also different from the way the artistic product itself functions as advertising for the order under which it is produced. My memory is technically superior to commercial films. It's severe and different from this reserved stock of images, as if undulating, awful curtains. The black frame renders the glance penetrating, and the range that sets fire to the cheekbone adds brightness to a woman's face. Makeup, let it display itself. Side views. Makeup doesn't have the need to hide itself. It'll function as advertising for the order under which it is produced. Let it display itself. At least it does so with honesty. Black and white film, it's severe and suits my taste for analysis. Let it display this reserved stock of images. Figure 23, untitled, 1985. A remarkable degree of red means that a remarkable exchange is made. A cool red rose and a pink cup pink, a collapse and sold whole, a little less hot. Systematize confusion and thereby contribute to discrediting the world of reality. I like the rule that corrects the emotion. What is most real is the illusions I create. My memory is, you should wear white more often, it becomes you. Today, insults have become an honor. Spit is a luxury item. We frame it on the model, the mirror of rain. A shining indication of yellow consists in there having been more of the same color than could have been expected when all four were bought. This necessarily spread into nothing. Side view. A cool red rose and a pink cup pink, a collapse and sold whole, a little less hot. Today, insults have become a luxury item. A remarkable exchange is made. We frame it on the model, a pink, cut pink, a collapse, and sold whole. You should wear white more often, it becomes you. Side view 2. Systematize confusion and thereby contribute to a shining indication of yellow. What is most real is the illusions I create, more of the same color than could have been expected. It's like the rule that corrects the emotion. This necessarily spread into nothing.
Thank you so much. I am so deeply, deeply grateful for this evening. Thank you, all of you, for coming. We have until 9 to luxuriate a little bit, so please have a glass of wine, take another tour of the retrospective, although you can't do those two things at the same time, no wine in the exhibition. And yes, please, Maria, yeah. So let me just say thank you immensely to Christophe Chérix, to Maria Gillisson, for this inimitable exhibition of Broodthaers' work, and most of all to the poets this evening, Jen, Christian, Craig, Monica, Tanya, Tan, and, of course, Marcel. This is Maria Gillisson.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, Madame Christophe. Christophe Chérix, qui est à la base de tout, is the basis of everything what has happened around Broodthaers now in New York, I would say nearly in the States. And Elizabeth, it's curious that his poetry has been taken up in America, and that the edition, what is it called? The Sligo? Siglio. That Siglio is the first one who published again his poetry translated. So congratulations, and it is really curious to have his poetry coming back. And I myself, I must say that I neglected his, I've been so busy with so many things that I neglected the poetry. And I'm very, very grateful to you. The poets, thank you very, very much. It was all very nice and brilliant. But I would like to take the occasion, may I, to say two things to you? Yes? You made a tiny, tiny, tiny mistake, which that really nobody can know if you don't live the area where we lived, for example, you know. So it's only to, perhaps to let you know, the Dutch, you know, he was Flemish. He was a Belgian, and from the Flemish side. And the Dutch, they are from above a natural frontier which has been formed by 3 rivers, the Rhine, the Meuse, and another one. And so we know all that in the 16th century we had this magnificent, these magnificent painters in Belgium, and mostly in Flanders, but also one, and I'm very proud of that, is Van Eyck. Van Eyck came where I have been born. Now, then history, for me, has made a great mistake because they would call all those painters from the 17th century when finally, the Luther and what is the other one? Luther and the reformers, the Protestant reformers, there was a second. And this has been very successful in the north, what one calls Holland or Dutch, you see? So then in the following up these teachings, that part of the Netherlands, if you want, which one calls Holland, has become extremely successful financially. And so they would call it, and even we call it today, the Golden Century. The Golden Century, and so on the other side of the rivers, where normally the great poets and artists are born, they, as normal, they would have been attracted to the money. I mean, they would go there where the money are. And that's what even happens today. Even we would go to Germany because there was some money, and which we wouldn't have in our country, in Belgium, you see? So then, in Holland, and if we say today, the Dutch painting or the Holland painters, it doesn't exist. It's an error in history. They are all from Flemish stock. They have gone to Holland. And so, of course, there are one or two exceptions, like in all situations. So all the Vermeer and the Frans Hals, and go on and on and on, they are all from Flemish stock. And of course, it's difficult for you here so far away in America to know those details. But because of this tiny error, I take the occasion to put this a little to you. And then it was so brilliant, I found, and so precise. May I ask your name? Monica? No, you did. Craig. Voilà. And then I would also like to rectify something when one talks about surrealism and Broodthaers. Broodthaers, he was a realist and not a surrealist, you know? He was simply a realist. And as the director of this house would say, would he be romantic? And then, yes, I would say he is a romantic realist. Yes? Voilà. There is something else. No, but it was really very nice and very precise, like a kind of diamond.
I think we can pursue the discussion with a glass of wine in hand, so thank you very much.
I'm sorry.
Some people have to do this. I just didn't want to make